Gibb has said many times that he carries his father with him, not in photographs, not in heirlooms, not in the trophies that filled entire rooms after the Bee Gees conquered the world, but in something far quieter. Something he didn't recognize until decades later, when the noise of fame settled, when the applause faded, and when the man who shaped his entire life was no longer there to explain himself. It's strange how a father's love can hide inside the very things that hurt the most. Barry grew up believing his father, Hugh Gibb, wanted one thing from him: perfection. And perfection, especially for a child, can feel like pressure or punishment. Hugh wasn't cruel, but he was demanding, pushing Barry to practice when other kids were playing, correcting every note, drilling timing into him until music felt less like a dream and more like an obligation he could never escape. For years, Barry thought those moments stole pieces of his childhood. He couldn't understand why his father seemed so hard, so unyielding, so determined to shape him into something Barry didn't even know he could become. But time has a way of revealing the truth in the most unexpected moments. It wasn't until Barry was a grown man, a father himself, a global icon, and eventually the last brother standing, that he finally understood what Hugh had really given him. A gift that didn't come wrapped in praise, or softness, or easy affection, but in toughness, consistency, and a belief that Barry didn't recognize as love until it was too late to tell Hugh he finally understood. And that's the heart of this story. How a father's hardest lessons became the very thing that saved Barry Gibb, in music, in grief, and in life. If stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to join us here on RetroWaves, where the legends live on through the moments that shaped them. Before the world saw the shimmering lights of disco, before the stadiums, the Grammys, the falsetto that became a generation's soundtrack, Barry Gibb was just a boy living in a cramped house in post-war Manchester. And in that house, music wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline. The Gibb family had little money, few opportunities, and almost no safety net. But they had one thing that held everything together: Hugh Gibb's unshakable belief that his children could rise above the life he never escaped. Hugh wasn't a distant father. He was present, sometimes overwhelmingly so, especially when it came to music. A drummer by trade, he had tasted just enough failure to become determined that his sons wouldn't repeat it. But that determination came with a price. Hugh pushed Barry harder than anyone else, not because he saw a flaw in him, but because he saw a spark that terrified him, a spark he feared would burn out without discipline. Barry was shy, sensitive, imaginative, the kind of child who felt everything too deeply. And in Hugh's world, sensitivity didn't protect you. Discipline did. So Hugh pushed. Early morning harmonies, late night practices, repetition until their voices blended like muscle memory. Corrections that stung more in pride than in body. Barry didn't understand it then. To him it felt like pressure, a father demanding perfection from a child who only wanted approval. But Hugh saw the world differently. He saw obstacles everywhere: poverty, limited education, and a system that swallowed boys whole if they didn't fight back. Music was their escape route, but it had to be airtight, polished, precise, undeniable. And so a quiet conflict formed between father and son. Barry loved his father, but he feared disappointing him even more. This tension would follow Barry into his teenage years, shaping the very foundation of the Bee Gees. Because the truth was simple but painful. Hugh wasn't raising musicians, he was forging survivors. But Barry wouldn't realize that until life tested him in ways no stage, no spotlight, no screaming audience ever could. Only then would he understand what his father had been preparing him for all along. Before Barry Gibb ever stepped on a stage, before the Bee Gees were even a dream forming in three young brothers' minds, there was a small house in Manchester filled with tension, hope, and a father's fear. Hugh Gibb knew too well what it meant to live your whole life on the edge of poverty. He had spent years chasing gigs, taking whatever work came his way, always one missed opportunity away from going under, and he saw the same fate waiting for his sons unless he pushed them hard enough to outrun it. Barry felt that pressure long before he understood it. Hugh woke the boys early, earlier than any child wanted to be awake. He drilled harmony until their voices blended so naturally that neighbors thought they were listening to a radio. He demanded discipline, not because he enjoyed being strict, but because he believed it was the only shield he could give them against a world that didn't care about their dreams. For Barry, the oldest son with the softest heart, this felt heavier than anyone realized. He was the one Hugh leaned on, the one expected to lead, the one expected to set the tone. When his younger brothers struggled, Hugh looked to Barry first, not with anger, but with expectation. "They follow you," Hugh would say, "so you have to be better." It was a compliment disguised as a burden, and Barry carried it without protest. Because every child, even one destined for greatness, wants one thing more than anything else: to make their father proud. But as the years passed, the unspoken fear grew inside him. Barry wasn't afraid of failing on stage. He wasn't afraid of audiences, or competition, or even poverty. His fear was simpler and far more painful. Failing meant disappointing the one man whose approval could steady his entire world. And that fear would shape every song he wrote, every harmony he perfected, every risk he took. Barry didn't know it then, but this fear, this pressure, wasn't meant to break him. It was meant to prepare him for the most extraordinary and devastating chapters of his life. Chapters where music wouldn't just be a dream, it would be survival. Barry Gibb was barely a teenager when he began to realize something that most children never have to confront. Music wasn't just a passion in the Gibb household, it was the family's lifeline. The Gibbs Hugh found were inconsistent. Some weeks they had dinner on the table, some weeks they didn't, and every time the world pressed down on Hugh's shoulders, he pushed harder on his sons, especially Barry. Barry felt that shift like a tremor running through the floorboards. Whenever money was tight, the rehearsals became longer. Whenever Hugh feared life was closing in, the critiques became sharper. Whenever failure seemed too close, Hugh demanded perfection, as if perfection itself could save them. Most parents shield their children from hardship. Hugh didn't. He turned the hardship into a training ground. Barry remembers nights when his father would turn off the television if a harmony fell apart. He remembers the way Hugh paced the room during rehearsals like a coach preparing his team for a championship game. He remembers the sting, not of harshness, but of confusion. Why did something as beautiful as music feel like a battlefield? Yet Barry kept singing, kept practicing, kept striving, because beneath every demanding correction, he sensed something else, something he didn't have a name for yet. Fear, not Barry's fear, Hugh's, the fear of watching his sons fall into the same traps he had fallen into, the fear of gifting them a dream that might ruin their lives instead of elevating them, the fear of knowing how unforgiving the world was beyond those four walls. And in his own imperfect way, Hugh believed that toughness was love, that shaping the boys with iron would keep them from breaking later. But Barry, still too young to understand, only felt the weight of it, the closeness, the pressure, the quiet ache of wanting reassurance instead of critique. Those early years planted a seed inside Barry, a belief that he must always be on, always excellent, always ready. A belief that failing wasn't personal failure, it was family failure. A belief that would follow him across oceans, onto stages, and into the brightest and darkest moments of his life. When the Gibb family moved to Australia in 1958, it wasn't for adventure, it was for survival. Manchester had given them little more than cold nights and colder prospects, and Hugh believed that a new country might offer the stability he could never find at home. But the move didn't lighten the pressure on Barry. If anything, it sharpened it. Australia was a reset button, but it was also a test. New country, new competition, new expectations, and Hugh's belief was simple and unyielding. This time, we do it right. The Gibb brothers began performing anywhere that would take them: speedway tracks, talent shows, tiny local events where cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, and the audience expected more grit than innocence. Barry felt himself stretched thin, caught between childhood and destiny, between wanting to play and needing to work. It was during this time that music stopped being a burden and became a force. One night, after a performance at the Red Cliff Speedway, a moment happened that Barry would never forget. The crowd, rough, loud, unpredictable, began throwing coins onto the track as the brothers sang. At first, the boys thought it meant they'd done badly, but when they stepped off stage, Hugh told them the truth. They loved you. That's their way of paying. Something shifted in Barry that night. For the first time, he saw beyond the rehearsals, beyond the corrections, beyond the pressure. He saw the possibility, the power of music, and he saw the pride in Hugh's eyes, subtle but unmistakable. It was also in Australia that Barry discovered his gift for songwriting. He would stay awake long after his brothers fell asleep, scribbling lyrics, humming melodies into the dark, shaping emotion into form. Hugh noticed, and while he didn't always have the words to say it, he recognized that Barry wasn't just good, He was destined. But destiny comes with its own weight. The more Barry grew into his talent, the more Hugh pushed. The more Hugh pushed, the more Barry wondered if any achievement would ever be enough. Australia gave Barry the first taste of success, real, tangible, undeniable. But it also deepened the quiet distance between father and son. Barry was starting to shine, and Hugh expected that shine to become a beacon strong enough to lift the whole family, a beacon Barry wasn't sure he was ready to carry. When the Bee Gees finally exploded into the global spotlight, most people thought the hardest part of their journey was over. But for Barry Gibb, success didn't silence the pressure, it amplified it. Suddenly, the expectations weren't just coming from his father, but from the entire world. Every chart position, every interview, every performance, every note he sang felt like a test he couldn't afford to fail. What Barry didn't realize was that he was drawing from the very lessons his father drilled into him during those early years. Hugh's insistence on discipline became Barry's anchor. The long hours rehearsing harmonies turned into the Bee Gees' signature sound. The pressure to lead became the backbone of Barry's role as the artistic center of the group. But with fame came shadows. The Bee Gees were straddling rock, pop, and soul, genres that didn't always welcome them. Critics were harsh, other musicians dismissed them. And when the tides turned against disco, it wasn't just a genre under attack, it was the Bee Gees themselves. Barry felt the weight of it all more deeply than his brothers ever understood. Every insult, every accusation of being manufactured, every moment their music was mocked, it felt personal, because Barry had spent his whole life believing that his worth came from being enough, being excellent, being perfect, and perfection was slipping through his fingers. During these years, Barry and Hugh grew closer in some ways and more distant in others. Hugh was proud, unquestionably proud, but he was also a man who expressed love in small, quiet signs rather than emotional declarations. A subtle nod at a performance, a rare smile when a new song charted, a simple, "That's good, son." For Barry, those moments mattered more than the world's applause. But they weren't enough to still the ache inside him, the childhood echo of wondering whether he had truly made his father proud or whether Hugh would always see room for him to be better. What Barry didn't understand yet was simple. Hugh didn't push him because he wasn't enough. He pushed him because he already was. But life would have to break Barry down before he finally saw that truth clearly. The world remembers the Bee Gees for their brilliance, the shimmering vocals, the genre-defining harmonies, the songs that became cultural touchstones. But Barry remembers something else, the crash. The disco backlash wasn't just a trend shift, it was a tidal wave that tried to erase everything the Bee Gees had built. Radio stations banned their music, venues refused bookings, headlines mocked their sound simply because the world had turned on the genre they helped define. Barry, the eldest brother, was the one everyone looked to for answers. Morris asked him, "What do we do now?" Robin asked, "How do we fix this?" And the industry asked the cruelest question of all, "Are you finished?" This could have been the moment Barry broke. The pressure was suffocating. The criticism was relentless. The fear of disappointing his family, the fear planted in him since childhood, roared back louder than ever. But then something unexpected happened. In the darkest moment of their career, Barry didn't collapse. He didn't withdraw. He didn't surrender. He worked, song after song, session after session, reinvention after reinvention. He turned his pain into melodies that would bring other artists back to the top of the charts. Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, Dolly Parton, and Kenny Rogers. At a time when the world didn't want to hear the Bee Gees, it still desperately wanted to hear Barry's pen, Barry's melodies, Barry's gift. The same discipline Hugh had drilled into him, the repetition, the perfectionism, the refusal to accept good enough, became the very thing that saved Barry's life and career. And somewhere deep down, Barry began to understand something he had missed as a child. His father hadn't been preparing him for fame, he'd been preparing him for resilience, preparing him to survive loss, preparing him to carry responsibility, preparing him for the moment when talent alone wasn't enough and only grit would keep him standing. Barry still didn't fully realize it, but he was already living the greatest gift Hugh ever gave him. It wasn't fame or success or even tragedy that finally opened Barry's eyes to the truth behind his father's hardness. It was fatherhood itself. When Barry had children of his own, he found himself doing something he never expected, repeating Hugh's words, telling his own boys to stay disciplined, teaching them consistency, expecting them to follow through on what they started. and each time he caught himself, a small shock ran through him. He was becoming the man he once feared disappointing, but fatherhood softened the lines and brought clarity where confusion once lived. Barry began to see Hugh through a new lens, not as a strict taskmaster, but as a man fighting against the limitations of his own life. A man who wanted more for his children than he had ever been able to achieve. A man whose toughness wasn't anger, it was protection. Barry realized that Hugh wasn't shaping musicians, he was shaping men. Men who could endure, men who could reinvent, men who could survive grief, criticism, heartbreak, and global scrutiny. And then came the moment that changed everything, the death of Morris in 2003. Barry was shattered. He withdrew from music, from life, from the world. And in that silence, a silence so deep it frightened him, he finally understood what his father had been preparing him for all along: how to keep going when the people you love the most are gone. It hit him like a wave he couldn't outrun. Hugh wasn't just teaching discipline, he wasn't teaching music, he wasn't teaching perfection. He was teaching survival, the kind Barry would desperately need as he became the last living Gibb brother. And in that moment of devastating clarity, Barry felt something surprising. Not anger, not sadness, but gratitude. A gratitude he wished he could have told Hugh face to face. Barry Gibb has lived through the kinds of losses most people couldn't survive once, let alone more than once. He lost Andy first, the baby of the family, the one everyone thought would outlive them all. Then Morris, the person who held the Bee Gees together when the storms were too big for anyone else to handle alone. And then Robin, the brother whose voice had carried Barry through every stage of their shared destiny. With each loss, Barry found himself pulled back into memories of childhood. Not the music, not the fame, not the big moments people celebrate, but the smallest ones, the mornings Hugh woke them before sunrise, the days he pushed Barry to sing the same line, 10 different ways, the moments when Hugh stood in the back of a room, arms folded, saying nothing, but watching everything. One night, years after losing his brothers, Barry sat alone in his Miami home, a guitar in his lap, unable to sing a single note. The silence was suffocating. For the first time in his life, Barry wondered if music had abandoned him, or if he had abandoned music. And then he remembered something Hugh once told him when he was a boy: "When you're lost, keep working. The song will come find you." It was such a simple phrase, tossed out casually in their living room back in Manchester. But in that moment, in the quiet of his grief, it became everything. Barry picked up the guitar. He strummed a single chord, then another. Slowly, painfully, music returned, not because of talent, not because of fame, but because his father had built something inside him so strong that even heartbreak couldn't destroy it. And that was the moment Barry finally understood. Hugh's greatest gift wasn't discipline, it wasn't toughness, it wasn't expectation, it was endurance. A belief that no matter how dark life became, Barry could stand back up. Keep going, keep creating, keep living. It took a lifetime, and the loss of nearly everyone he loved, for Barry to see it clearly. But when he did, he realized something that softened every hard memory. His father hadn't been preparing him to be perfect, he'd been preparing him to survive. Looking back now, Barry Gibb speaks about his father with a softness that wasn't always there. Not because the past has changed, but because Barry finally understands what he couldn't see as a child. Hugh Gibb wasn't shaping a superstar. He wasn't molding a frontman. He wasn't trying to build a musical dynasty. He was trying to give his sons a life better than the one he lived. And the only tools he had were the ones life had given him: discipline, resilience, and the unshakable belief that talent only matters if you can stand when everything else falls. Barry carries that with him now. Every time he walks into a studio, every time he hears a melody forming in the quiet, every time he speaks about his brothers with tears in his voice and grace in his heart, the gift wasn't perfection, it wasn't pressure, it wasn't music, it was strength, the kind that grows slowly, quietly, painfully, and becomes the foundation that carries a man through the moments that would break anyone else. Today, when Barry talks about his father, he doesn't mention the long rehearsals or the stern corrections first. He mentions the lessons, the purpose, the hidden love buried beneath years of toughness, and he mentions how he wishes he'd had the chance to tell Hugh what he finally understands now. My whole life, you were preparing me to keep going, and he has. Through fame, through loss, through unimaginable grief, through the loneliness of being the last Gibb standing, Barry Gibb survived because his father taught him how, and that, more than music, more than awards, more than legacy, is the greatest gift Hugh Gibb ever gave his son.